So having set up our mats, we're now going to look at the Z depth. Now, very easy, just in our render settings tab. Now I'm doing this on the utility layer, but you could do it as part of the master, there's no reason not to. And you can do add, and again I'm going to strip the name down a bit. And we're going to render this out. So the node itself has a few settings: user depth from camera, or depth black and depth white. So this is basically determining which part of the Z depth will be black and which will be white in my units. Since we're not filming a castle or something very big, I'm going to change this down to 200, which will be more suitable for our vignette. So we're saying 200 centimeters away or 2 meters away, it will be white, and anything at the camera will be black. You can clamp this so that it has a maximum value. You don't need to do that. And that's it. Now here we have this tab, filtering. Now I want you to pay close attention to this, because I'm going to render this out. I'm going to bring it into Nuke, and then we're going to switch it off and apply it again. So filtering is anti-aliasing, of course. So obviously it's a quick render because we haven't got any AO or anything. And this is what our depth pass looks like. So tweaking the depth white and depth black will actually change this grayscale. Many composites, let me just quickly show you that actually. So if I change this to 100, you'll get a different look. There you go, a lot more black, a lot more white. So a lot brighter. Stop. So I'm going to set that back to 200 because I like that number. And run it. So here we are in Nuke. So I've brought in my utility render layer, and I've brought this onto, this is essentially the same script we've been using all along. I've just deleted the switch and just kept the one when we fix the edges. So that's all good. So the way to bring the Z depth in is you create a copy node. Now by default a copy node in Nuke, and by the way the hotkey is K. A copy node here will by default copy the alpha into from the A channel, A pipe into the B pipe, the B pipe being the main pipe, remember, in Nuke. So in this case we don't want to copy the alpha, we want to copy the depth. So depth, and we want to copy that into the depth. So there we go. So we want Z depth. I'm going to put that onto our comp. Now that actually does nothing. All that does is it means that in this render it looks exactly the same, but it has a depth channel. So you can see that there. Okay. So it looks red because it's just one channel, so it's displaying it in the equivalent of the red channel, and therefore it looks red. You could look at it in the alpha, and that will look more like we're seeing in V-Ray. Let's actually view the alpha in the alpha. Now, actually no, let's keep doing that. Let's view that in there instead of our alpha, since the alpha is not particularly informative. I'm going to create a Z defocus node. So again in the DAG, select my copy node, tab, Z defocus. So it uses the Z depth to defocus it. It's a bit like an iPhone. You can grab this focal point, move it around, and it will let you set the focus that way. Let me close the copy node and pop this one out so you can see it. So the focal point that we're moving around is just a handy UI thing. The actual number that is being moved is this number here, this focal plane number. So I can bring that up and down and affect which parts of the render are in focus or not. It doesn't affect how much they're in focus. We also have this depth of field. Now this is basically how much is in focus. Those of you that know a bit about photography will know how this works. The smaller the aperture and the wider the lens, the wider the depth of field, and it's going to be smaller. Now to see what we're doing, especially on the screen request, you can actually, rather than looking at the output, you can look at this focal plane setup. So you can see, and if I hover over it, you'll see it explains that red is nearer to the camera than the focus plane, green is the in-focus area, and blue is further from the camera than the focus plane. So that's interesting because if I go here on the camera, so remember this, we've got red is nearer than the camera. That doesn't make a lot of sense. The table, which is nearer, is actually considered further away. So it's viewing it backwards. That's because far equals 0, and actually far equals 1. So far equals, or we can just change that to depth. So now this makes a bit more sense. Now of course we have a depth of field of 0, so we have no depth of field. So let's set it to something sensible. Bear in mind that we're quite close in. Now, where of course we have issues is with the transparent objects, because it's a bit unsure whether to look at the bottle or the object behind, and that's actually tricky even optically to decide. But so this is, in fact, this is one of the weaknesses of this approach. So I'm now going to look at the result. Now it's quite subtle, so I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to hover over there, press spacebar and H so we can see it a bit bigger. I'm going to move this over and hopefully you can see it, a bit more of it, while keeping this here. Now I'm going to increase the amount to something silly. So we can see these elements getting defocused a little bit here. Let me toggle this node on and off. Now you can disable the hotkey D, but since I've hidden the DAG, it's actually easier to do it this way with the disable tab. So you can see this far mug is going out of focus. Let's crank it up to something really silly. Let's put that up to 20. Let's put that up to 70. So we're getting sort of almost macro, just so it's much easier to see what kind of things we're getting. Now you can see here some interesting effects. So you've got the gun still in focus even through the glass, which sort of makes sense. But we've got, and the mug is using the plane of the mug rather than the plane of the glass, which again makes some kind of sense. Now you can actually make the defocusing actually much more attractive in Nuke using different kinds of filter types. You can use bladed, you can even put in an image to create custom bokeh, but that's a little bit beyond what we're looking at. We're more interested in how V-Ray is processing this information. Now where it looks can be a bit strange is in our edges. So what we might want to see is what happens if we render this without filtering. Is that better or worse?